Hi everyone, my name's Jodie Hill and I'm here today to talk to you about ADHD and my late diagnosis. So who am I? Well, I'm the managing partner of a law firm now, but it wasn't always that. I set Thrive Law up 4 years ago now. And the idea of Thrive is really for us to create an environment where people can be their true self. It would allow me to thrive literally in my own workplace and have flexible working, well-being and neurodiversity, as well as diversity and inclusion at the core of everything that we do. So I now have a team of about 20, I think there is, of us across the UK. We're based in Leeds, but we have lawyers all across the UK, from London to Devon to Manchester and everything in between. So we actually specialise in employment law and making things like adjustments for people in the workplace with disabilities. So it's a pleasure to be invited today to talk to you about my own experience. I'm quite open about my experience of having ADHD and just that process that I've gone through recently. So what is ADHD? Well, first of all, it's not naughty boys. I always thought when I was, well, certainly until I was diagnosed, that, ADHD manifests and very much to the misconceptions that the media play, but manifests as naughty behaviour or very distractible. But it's so much more complex than that. We're all on a spectrum. And I think it's really important to understand that ADHD manifests differently in every single person, not just between genders, but also the impact of each symptom can have a huge range as well. And it certainly doesn't impact on intelligence. Often what happens is someone with ADHD becomes more distracted and therefore ends up, for example, not wanting to complete an assignment or forgetting to do that, rather than that they're not intelligent. So that's how it can impact on exam results rather than the other way around. So I thought this would be really helpful visual for you guys to look at. Often what people think is ADHD is hyperactivity, fidgeting, trouble focusing, and that's it. And you can see underneath the line in the iceberg of what ADHD actually is. And I thought I'd just pick out some of these that really resonate with me. So I have a real issue around sensory processing. I have with really bright lights. In fact, in my house, I have orange lights rather than white lights. I really struggle maintaining and following conversations, partly because I want to finish someone's sentence and I want to impulsively verbalize something before they've finished. And obviously that can come across quite rude. Sometimes I have a real difficulty in stopping myself from doing that. And generally, like impulse control, like if someone wants to do something fun, ask me, because I'll always say yes. I'm very much all or nothing. And I think, I've really struggled in the past to regulate my emotions, partly because I also have anxiety. So trying to regulate that with understanding, relationships and workplaces and developing my career in law. And lots of other things on there also resonate. But I think one of the most difficult things that I found was like remembering to go to the bathroom and eat and sleep and remembering to do certain things. I had a really poor sense of time and short-term memory. And I just thought I was just a bit clumsy as well. My spatial awareness was all over the place and I'm constantly walking into things and bruising myself. So as you can see, lots of different things, and lots of people go, oh, I have that. And the reality is, they may have some of those symptoms. It doesn't mean they have ADHD. It's much more than one or two of these symptoms. And there's quite an intensive test that I'll go through shortly with you that you need to be able to satisfy to be able to receive that diagnosis from a psychiatrist. But let's not focus on the negatives, because, as you can see, I am the CEO and managing partner of a law firm. So, I've clearly been able to be successful even without knowing I had ADHD this whole time. And actually, one of the benefits is for every one of those negatives, there is a benefit. And on here, you can see some of the positives that people have said about myself, but also about other people that I know that have ADHD. And I certainly would say, most people who have ADHD are very funny, they're very charismatic, they have loads of fun, and it's because they're impulsive and they don't always want to just toe the line. But you also find that they're deeply emotional, very kind and empathetic, very, I suppose, in tune with how people are feeling around them, feeling an energy from someone, and sometimes too empathetic, actually. Authentic as well. So, kind of not often very direct and very minimal filter, often what we find, and competitive and loving. Lots of great attributes to being ADHD, but it doesn't come without its negatives. And that's why it's important to get a diagnosis early on, because then you can start to put things in place for you to support yourself throughout your career and obviously throughout your studies as well. So I wanted to talk, obviously being a woman, I wanted to talk about ADHD in women. And one of the reasons that I wasn't diagnosed until a later date was basically because I was trying to fit in. I now know this, but I didn't know that at the time. But when I was 10, I went to boarding school and I started to mirror the behaviors of the people that I went to school with. And I suppressed a lot of the ADHD behaviors through lots of different, what we would now call coping mechanisms. And some of the stuff that I probably would have learned through an ADHD coach had I had that support then. I put these things in place for myself. And what that meant was I was just trying a million times harder than anyone else, but I didn't make that obvious to anyone. And really the reason for that is people want to fit in, especially as a child. You want to fit into the environment. You want to improve your experience of any social situations. And obviously you don't want to annoy people. And that was one of the things I was so conscious of, constantly annoying people, constantly butting in to conversations. I was just unable to stop that. So I really did practice that when I was younger. And I actually wasn't diagnosed till I was 32, which I'll come on to. But only through that process was I able to then realize that that's what I'd been doing all that time. And, that had exacerbated pre-existing anxiety as well. And also, symptoms of overthinking, things like that. There's some of these will be symptoms of both anxiety and ADHD, but they exacerbated one another because I wasn't dealing with that. So what might it look like for you guys? Well, you might mimic others in social situations. You might be able to feel like you can't relax before a social situation or before a deadline because you don't want to miss that deadline. Often people with ADHD have time blindness. So like what could feel like 5 minutes is actually an hour, or the other way around. It could be 3 hours and it's 15 minutes. So that is a real issue, especially for like missing appointments. So that is a huge one for me as well. The other thing I would say is having difficulty focusing generally because you're trying to hide excessive energy. You're probably seeing I'm moving around quite a lot, and one of the difficulties you have when you have certainly the hyperactive part of ADHD. I've been diagnosed with ADHD combined, so that's hyperactive and inattentive. And the hyperactive side just gives you so much energy that you just feel like you need to move around quite a lot. So I'm very, very fidgety. And when you try to focus on not doing that, you then lose the room. You forget what you're talking about. You can often completely zone out. That can be very, very difficult to maintain. And the big one for me is how much I talk. I talk very quickly. I talk a lot. And actually, there was a time when I went on holiday this year and I actually lost my voice, and I realized how much I spoke because I was with my friend and I had to WhatsApp her what I wanted to say. And I was thinking, God, I would have said that. Literally, I would have said all these things that came into my head, and I started writing something like, oh, I can't be bothered. But it just showed how everything that comes into my head just comes out. So that's really difficult when you're trying to stop that because all your energy is going on that focus rather than focusing on the conversation at hand. So I mentioned before that I have a dual diagnosis of ADHD. So you can have ADHD without the hyperactivity and the impulsiveness. You could be inattentive. So that's often where you struggle to focus and you have more of the internalized symptoms of ADHD. And what we find in women is generally they will have more of those symptoms, and that's why it's undiagnosed often till a later date. So often hyper talkative, lots of daydreaming. Like often you see with boys, oh, they're hyperactive, they must have ADHD, and with girls when they're daydreaming, oh, they're just a girl. And the reality is that's not the case. And just daydreaming alone isn't indicative of ADHD. But as I said before, some of these symptoms, when taken together collectively, can result in a diagnosis. So on to me, on my diagnosis. Well, as I said, I was diagnosed shortly after my 32nd birthday. So I literally was having some difficulty in the lockdowns, and partly because I had to slow down and I had to create this environment that wasn't, I sat in my home office. I wasn't out doing all the things that I'm used to, expending all that energy. And I really started to internalize some of that and become quite self-aware and self-reflective. Now, I've already had anxiety for a number of years. I've already experienced anxiety symptoms, treatment, medication, therapy, you name it, I've done it. And I felt like my anxiety was under control to a degree, but I feel like I'm really self-aware of my anxiety now. And I felt like there was, I don't know, there was something else. There was just something else and I couldn't put my finger on it. So I did some research and I explored getting a consultation with a psychiatrist to discuss the possibility of ADHD. So that was me kind of thinking that there was something else and it could be this because this of the research that I did. And, you know, I think if we hadn't have had the lockdowns, I don't think I would have, one, had the time to do all of that, and two, I probably wouldn't have had that ability to self-reflect and really internalize some of those thoughts and feelings. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity, because what it meant was I was able to get well, unfortunately, I wasn't able to go on the NHS. There was a 2-year waiting list. So I paid privately for an online consultation in the lockdowns. And basically that process was a Zoom call with a psychiatrist. It was also 2 of my family and 1 of my friends who'd known me for a long time to complete a questionnaire. So they had to complete questions about me that would go to my psychiatrist. And that document basically formed the basis of our consultation, like talking about, you know, I had to answer questions about me and they also did. So you had some that were focused more on childhood, some that were focused more on now, and some that were a hybrid of the 2. So it's quite a long process in that, you know, when you get diagnosed with something like anxiety, it's pretty much a conversation with your doctor. This was much more intense and, you know, really asking some difficult questions about myself and also seeing what others, you know, thought about me and how I behave. So that was really, it was interesting actually. I was really grateful for my friends and family to give the time to do that. But I suppose like the big question for a lot of people is, well, how did you feel? Like, you know, you've gone all this time and you'd still made it as a lawyer and all this stuff. Well, yeah, I have. But I think knowing that now, I feel a bit relieved. I feel like I have some answers for the way that I process information and the way that I manifest some of my behaviors. And it allows me to be able to put things in place to help me more, but also it allows me to be kinder to myself. And I think for me, that has been a really enlightening part of the process. So during that process, during the consultation that my psychiatrist gave me the diagnosis of dual and explained why. And then I got a report. So, you know, that report I then could go back and reflect on and read afterwards if I wanted to. And in fact, I actually pulled it out recently because one of the things I recalled was I have issues with speeding, and one of the symptoms of ADHD is just obviously being distracted and not seeing the speedometer. So it's something I was trying to illustrate, and I was like, I'm sure that came out of my assessment, and actually it did. It is a symptom of ADHD. It doesn't mean you can get away with speeding, but it does mean that you have to put things in place to support yourself so that you don't end up doing that. Anyway, I digress. One of the outcomes of the assessment was about taking medication, and I was quite content to try this, because what the psychiatrist has said is that I'd actually already put a lot of things in place. So you know, obviously I'm running my own law firm and was relatively organized, and I still struggled, but I was getting to like lunchtime and finding it really difficult to focus. And I always say this, like we'll say more recently actually, that I struggled so much to read. And everyone's like, how did you do a law degree? How did you become a lawyer? Well, with difficulty, actually, I really struggled to read. I don't think I ever read a book back to front, apart from one. I think the Da Vinci Code I read once. And I really, really struggled to get all of that information in my head. So I had different ways of learning. I learned through audio, I learned through lots of colors and pens, and I had to make it really fun. And I would do all of my studying in the morning because I just couldn't focus in the afternoon. And the same went for work. You know, if I have a difficult piece of drafting or, you know, something that involves a lot more brain power, I did that in the morning because I just couldn't focus in the afternoon. So I really wanted to explore medication, and I was really fortunate to have a very positive experience with medication. I'm taking a slow release medication that allows me to function for the whole day and have more focus. It does not cure you. It wears off after the end of the day. And there are side effects for lots of people. So you have to balance that with the benefits, and everybody has to go on their own journey about what works for them. I was really fortunate to find something that worked for me first time. Some people don't have that, and you do have to try, you know, a lot of different medications over a long period of time. Now, because I went private, I didn't realize the cost. Every single time I got a prescription, it was like £90 or £98. Like, it was a ridiculous amount of money. And obviously, that's something to bear in mind. If you can go NHS, then obviously do that, because the cost of the medication will be the NHS price. If not, until your medication is at the right level, the psychiatrist is likely to keep you under assessment on a private basis and then move you to dual care, which I'm now on with my GP. So once we'd got like the dosage right, and we'd monitored my bloods and my pressure and all of that, blood pressure and all of that. And we made sure that, that there were no side effects that were causing any detrimental impact to me. Then I was able to move to a dual care with a private psychiatrist and a NHS GP to facilitate the prescription. But until that, you get to that point, you can't do that. So just thinking about the costs there as well. But I hope this has been really helpful. I obviously would be more than happy to hear from you guys, and I'm going to put more videos like this on my YouTube channel. So if you look us up on social media, you can find all of our details on there. But it's been really great to talk to you, and I'm happy to take any questions through our social channels or through our email. Thank you.